Well, hey folks, Sty here. Thanks for coming along. Sty story time. I'm out here in the woods, day camp, just goofing off. I did an earlier video when I first got out here, went looking for blackberries, and I got a big bag full of them, and then I showed a new wood gasification stove, camp stove I got. Boy, that thing worked good. Oh, it worked so good. And it was just a general video. This one's a Sty story. We're going to do a Sty story for a change. It's been a while since I've done any Sty stories, you know. I better get back into that because people are constantly messaging me and saying, when's the next Sty story? Okay. I don't know how many I've done so far, but you know, sooner or later I'm going to have to run out of stories. I'll have to start making stuff up. Anyway, folks. So, I showed you how my wood gasification stove worked, and I made a cup of coffee, and here's my fourth one since I fired that stove up. Now I finally let the stove cool down, because I had my first cup of coffee and I just kept playing with that stove after I stopped the video. Kept playing with it, feeding it. I still got a big pile of twigs here. I could play with it another 2 hours. But then I realized I hadn't had breakfast. I hadn't had lunch. And it's just going on 4 o'clock. I thought, well, I'll just have an early dinner, or else I'll call it lunch and I'll have a late dinner later. So I've always got in my truck, I've always got camp meals, you know, a lot of Mountain House trail meals, things like that, you know, small carry in the woods kind of meals. And so of course I had to dig through my food stash, and I had a Mountain House meal. That'll hold me over till late dinner. I'm only out here until the sun sets, but by golly, I'm staying out here until it does. So let's get on with a Sty story. This Sty story is going to be called You Can't Get There From Here. And the reason I thought of this story is because I ran into a feller earlier today. On my way up here, I stopped at a little gas station convenience store, and I wanted to pick up some bottled water, so I swung in there, and here's a tourist asking the guy at the counter how to get to a certain place along Lake Superior. And the guy at the counter says, you can't get there from here. And that reminded me of this story. Now I'll tell you at the end of this story how I dealt with that guy at the gas station and that tourist, because I helped the tourist out, and I also helped the guy at the gas station out on how to respond to people in the future. So on with the story. Okay, I was up in northwestern Montana, and I had my heart on hiking to this one lake way up in the backcountry, way up in the backcountry. Back in my younger days, of course. I'm not like MT Woods runner. Old Woods, hey. Yeah, he sees a peak and he goes, I think I can get there from here and here and here. And off he goes. And he bushwhacks his way to the top of those mountains. Oh man, I couldn't do that anymore. I could in my younger days, but not anymore. More power to Woods. But back in those days, I was game for anything. If I could see it, I'm going to go to it, right? Well, I couldn't see this lake. I just knew it was there. I had seen some aerial photos and saw that lake. And I wanted to hike into it. But I decided I wanted to take off on a Saturday. Nowhere for me to get my hands on. Now, these are the days when you didn't have the internet. Nowhere for me to get my hands on any topography maps or any kind of maps, period, for that area. I would have to wait till Monday. Well, that wasn't going to work. I'm going to head up that mountain today and I'm going to find that lake. So I jump in my truck and I head up this old Forest Service logging road. And I followed that road right to its end. And I thought, okay, looking at this, if I follow the side of the mountain around to the south, it looks like I could get on this. It looked like there was a really nice ridge that ran right towards that mountain I had to get to the lake. Now the lake sat about halfway down that mountain slope. And you wouldn't see it unless you're above it or you come right up to it, the way it was nestled there. And I figured, well, yeah, I can get in there that way. Well, but I couldn't see around the side of the mountain to know what am I going to run into on the other side. Well, all of a sudden, here comes this truck, comes up, and there's like a little turnaround, and he's backing around, and he's jagging his truck around, he parks, and he gets out and introduces himself. He's just an old boy from local area, and I told him what lake I was looking for, and he started laughing. And he goes, "You can't get there from here." I go, "Well, I was certain you could get there from here." I said, if I head around this mountain, and if I can get up there on that bench and follow that bench towards the summit, and then drop back down on the south side of that mountain, that lake should be sitting right there. He goes, "Oh, it's sitting right there, but you can't get there from here." I said, "Well, why not?" He says, "Well, you see that bench you're talking about?" He says, "You can see from here, you ain't getting up to it if you went straight across to it, because that's all cliffs. That's all high cliffs. You can't get up there unless you're a mountain climber." I said, "Well, that I'm not." I said, "Not in that sense." And he says, "And if you go around this little mountain here and come out on the other end, thinking you're going to get on that saddle and walk the ridge up to that mountain," he says, "you got another guess coming, because," he says, "you get around the corner of this mountain," he says, "and there's this huge gorge." He says, "It'll take you 3-4 hours just to get down that gorge and up the other side." And I thought, oh man, oh man. He says, "And you can't," he says, "you can't head this way." He said, because he says you got the same situation where you hit a gorge and you head down that gorge, and then the next thing you know, you got these 200-300 foot cliffs for about 3-4 miles. He says, "So you just can't get there from here." And I said, "Well, can you tell me where I need to go so that I can get there from there?" He goes, "Oh, I can do that." So he tells me, he says, "Now you're going to have to drive down, all the way back down. You get on the highway," and he says, "you head south about 10 miles, and then," he says, "you're going to turn and you're going to head east." He says, "and that's about another 8. And then you got to take," he gave me the Forest Service road name, and said, "you're going to have to take that Numbers Forest Service road." And he says, "it'll bring you out on such and such a mountain." And he said, "it's a small mountain." He says, "it'll bring you up on the top of that." And he says, and you can't go wrong. He says, you'll be able to see this mountain you're trying to get over to. He said, but from the other side. And he said, when you see that mountain, he says, you'll see that you got to follow a drainage. He says, there's a small creek. He says, you follow that drainage, and it'll take you right within, he says, about a quarter of a mile of that lake. And I said, how long's that drainage? He goes, oh, that's another 8 miles or so. So I'm thinking, holy smokes, the sun will be setting by the time I get anywhere near that lake. And I said, well, I guess that's my only way in. So I threw my gear back in my truck, and I'm going to head down the mountain and take his directions to get there. I figured the old boy's from the area. He knows how to get there. And just before I pulled out, he goes, oh, wait a minute, though. And I said, what's that? And he says, there is one other way to get there. I said, okay. Is it closer than the way you told me? And he goes, oh yeah, you just, now when you're heading down the mountain here, he says, you'll drive about 2 miles. And he says, you'll see this little, he says, it's a old logging road. Doesn't look like anybody's been using it. And he says, but I've been up that logging road just less than a week ago. He said, there are no trees over it, no rock slides over it or nothing. He says, you can get up in there with your truck. He says, so you go down a couple miles or so, and you'll see that road shooting off to the left. And I said, I know which one you're talking about. I said, it looks pretty rough. He says, nah, you'll get in there. He says, you turn on that, and he says, you stay on that thing until it finally grows in so thick you can't even drive in it anymore, and then stop and just keep following it. He says, you can still tell the road's there. Follow that. And he says, it'll bring you around this little knob, this little short little stub of a mountain. He said, it'll bring you around the backside of that. And I'm thinking, here we go. Now we're wandering all over the place again. And he goes, and once you come around the backside of that, he says, you can't miss it. He says, there's the lake. He says, it's about half mile down off that slope. I said, how long's the walk from where I'm going to have to stop the truck? He says, oh, no more than mile and a half. I was so mad. I told that old guy, I said, why didn't you tell me that in the first place? Because the route he told me to take, the very first route, it took him almost an hour to explain that route to me. Because he's the kind of guy that everything he saw going that route, he had to tell me about. Oh, and then when you go around this bend, you're going to see this rock. And if you go around that bend, there's this old larch tree. You can't miss it. And so his story was an hour long, telling me how to drive for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then hike for 8 hours to get to this lake. When all he had to do is say, you drive down here 2.5 miles, take a left, you follow that, and it's only about 3 miles up that road around that little knob of a mountain, and then you hike another 1.5 miles, 2 miles, and you can see the lake right down there. You can't get there from here. Well, there was obviously 2 ways you could get there from there. You go down the long way and all the way around, and then you hike up over through this huge drainage, or you just go a little ways down the road, hang a left, little ways farther in, hike 1.5 miles, and there you see the lake. But you can't get there from here. I told him, I said, you're goofy. You're just downright goofy. Tell me you can't get there from here, and it's less, even with the hike into the lake, it's going to be less than 1.5 hours, 2 hours. And he goes, well, yeah. I said, well, why didn't you tell me in the first place that it's that close for me to get in there? And he said, well, you never asked. He didn't. He goes, you didn't say what's the shortest route in there. He said, you told me to tell you where you needed to go to be able to get in there. So I told you the route that most people would use. He says, because this other short route most people don't know about. See, you just can't get there from here. I think back and I think of all the miles I would have hiked, all the driving I would have done, and how miserable that whole adventure would have turned out if I would have taken his first suggestion, and if I would have believed him, you can't get there from here. So, back to that gas station this morning. I told the gas attendant, I said, well, and I asked the guy, where do you want to go? And he told me. And I go, oh yeah, I can tell you how to get there. And that guy from the gas station said, well, you can't get there from here. I said, you surely can. You surely can. And I told the guy the quickest, shortest route to where he wanted to go. And it involved hiking. And the guy from the gas station says to me, he says, well, he says, you can't get there unless you hike in. And I looked at the tourists and I said, were you planning on hiking to this location? Because that's the only way you're going to get in there. And they said, well, yeah. But we want to know how to get there from here. I told them, yeah, you just go down the highway here for about 4 miles. You turn on this road, you take it to its end. There's a little parking area kind of in there. And you park and then you hike for a mile and a half down to the location you want. And that guy looked at the gas station attendant and said, but you told me you can't get there from here. He says, not driving you can't. He says, you're going to have to hike in there. I told that gas station attendant, I said, when you talk to people, always assume the best, not the worst. And always tell them the shortest route to where they're going. I said, you assumed that they just wanted to drive to that location, get out of their car, and they're there. I said, don't make assumptions. Don't assume anything. Just tell them, this is how you get there, and when you get there, you're going to have to hike down there. Instead of making assumptions and just saying, you can't get there from here. I said, because there's no place that you can't get to from here. Because from here, you could go somewhere else where you could get to it from there. So there is no such thing as you can't get to it from here. Don't ever buy into that when someone tells you, nope, you can't get there from here. It's always the next question is, well, then where do I have to be able to get there? Tell me how to get to that point. That's it. You can always get there from here. So there you go. There's a nice story for you. And I'll tell you what, I didn't know if I could get there from here. So, thanks for tagging along. I haven't done a Sty story in a long time, and I got kind of a list of things that I was going to do for Sty stories, and I pulled that off, dusted it off, and yeah, I've got a few more I can do, and I don't know if I'll do another one this afternoon or this evening yet before I head home, but I might. So you might see another Sty story coming in right behind this one. So, but thanks for tagging along. It's nice to have you out here with me. I just love it today. It's beautiful out here. The humidity finally went away. It's nice, cool. It's about 73 degrees and comfortable as can be. The reason I'm looking over my shoulder is about a half hour ago, I had a white-tailed deer go walking through, and I saw the movement. And then it wasn't 20 minutes later, I could have sworn I saw a dark-colored something cross this trail over here. It wasn't moving fast, but it was moving fast enough that I didn't catch it. I just caught it out of the corner of my eye moving through. And I'm just wondering if I don't have a bear that's wandering around the area. Probably smelled my mountain house. So maybe I'll have a new Sty story to tell if he decides to stop in for dinner. Doubt it. Hope not. Okay, folks. As always, Sty says, you all have a nice day. Bye-bye.